Something about this moment should make you pause, because April 28th is not arriving quietly. It is arriving like a signal that cuts through everything you thought you understood about your current reality. And if you are treating this like just another passing transit, then you are overlooking the magnitude of what is actually unfolding, because this day carries a density, a pull, an undeniable charge that has been building beneath the surface for weeks, and you have already felt it. Whether you could name it or not, over the past 3 weeks, there has been a tightening around your life, an almost invisible resistance that showed up exactly when you tried to move forward. Conversations that stalled decisions, that felt blocked impulses, that rose up only to be suppressed again. And it may have left you questioning yourself, wondering why everything suddenly felt heavier, slower, more constrained, as if something unseen was pressing down on you. But none of that was accidental. None of that was a sign that you were off track. It was the build-up, the quiet accumulation of pressure that had a purpose far beyond frustration. And now we arrive at April 28th, 2026, the exact moment where that pressure reaches its release point, because Mars, the embodiment of raw drive, physical force, and unapologetic action, is forming an exact trine with Black Moon Lilith, a point that represents everything within you that has been buried, denied, or pushed into the shadows. And this is not a gentle unfolding. This is not subtle. This is a rupture, a threshold where what has been held back can no longer remain contained. And what makes this even more intense is that this alignment does not just unlock expression. It amplifies presence. It changes the way you are felt by others. It introduces a kind of magnetism that does not ask for attention but commands it, a shift in your energy that people register before you even speak. And if you have been sensing a restless undercurrent lately, something stirring beneath your surface that you cannot fully explain, that is not random. That is your system responding to this exact build-up. And there is a specific reason why it is happening now, one that will become clearer as you move deeper into this moment. But before you can fully grasp that, you need to look back at how this tension was created in the first place, because this did not begin today. It has been unfolding since the beginning of April, when on April 9th, Mars moved into Aries, its home territory, the place where its energy is at full strength, direct, unfiltered, and unapologetic. That was the ignition point, the moment when something primal started to activate. But instead of flowing outward, that force immediately encountered resistance, because on April 19th, Mars met Saturn at the same degree in Aries. And Saturn does not allow impulsive action. Saturn compresses, restricts, demands patience and discipline. So what you experienced was not a lack of momentum. It was a collision between desire and limitation, between the urge to act and the force that says, wait. And for many people that translated into hesitation, self-doubt, holding back words, second-guessing decisions, feeling like every step forward required more effort than usual. And if you look honestly at your recent experience, you can probably recognize those moments where you wanted to speak, but stayed silent, where you felt ready to move, but stopped yourself, where your desires surfaced only to be pushed down again because the timing felt off or the risk felt too high. But that was not weakness. That was compression. That was the process of energy being concentrated, refined, loaded, like pressure building inside something that is preparing to release. And now, with this exact trine between Mars in Aries and Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, that stored force finds its outlet, the moment where restraint gives way to expression, where what has been held back begins to move. And to understand why this matters so deeply, you need to understand what Black Moon Lilith actually represents, because it is not a physical body. It is not something you can see. It is a calculated point, the place where the moon reaches its greatest distance from Earth in its orbit, the point of maximum separation. And symbolically, that distance reflects the parts of you that have been separated from your conscious identity. the traits, desires, and truths that were pushed away because they were judged, rejected, or deemed unacceptable. And if you trace that back through the myth, Lilith was not removed because she lacked value. She was cast out because she refused to diminish herself, because she would not accept a role that required her to become smaller. And instead of submitting, she chose distance. She chose exile. She chose to exist outside of what was considered acceptable, rather than betray her own nature. And that archetype lives within you as well, in the places where you have silenced yourself, where you have toned yourself down, where you have hidden aspects of who you are in order to maintain harmony or avoid rejection. And what this transit is doing is bringing those exiled parts back into contact with your active will, merging the force of Mars with the truth of Lilith, creating a moment where expression is not only possible, but inevitable. And that is why this day feels different, because it is not asking you to gently adjust. It is asking you to confront what you have been holding back and recognize that the pressure you felt was never meant to contain you permanently. It was meant to prepare you for this exact release. And what comes next will depend on how willing you are to meet that energy as it rises. There is a truth here that might feel uncomfortable at first, because the version of you that learned to stay safe is now being asked to step aside, and what replaces it is something far more honest, far more raw, and far less willing to negotiate with expectations, because Black Moon Lilith has never been about comfort. It has always been about choosing freedom, even when that freedom comes with consequences. And that is exactly the energy moving through you right now, the part of you that refuses to be shaped into something smaller, the part that remembers every moment you held back, every time you swallowed anger, dimmed your desire, hid your intensity, or silenced your truth just to remain acceptable. And all of that has been sitting beneath the surface, not gone, not erased, but waiting. And today, as Mars forms that exact trine with Lilith, what was hidden does not stay quiet anymore. It rises not as chaos, but as clarity, not as destruction, but as integration. And this is where so many people misunderstand what is happening, because they expect something explosive, something reckless, something that tears everything apart. But that is the language of tension, of harsh aspects that force conflict and demand painful choices. This is different. This is a smooth current, a 120-degree alignment in the element of fire, connecting Aries and Sagittarius. Two forces that do not seek approval. Two energies that move from instinct and inner truth. And when they connect in this way, there is no friction. There is no internal argument. There is only alignment. A direct line between what you feel driven to do and what you were once told you could not even want. And the result is something you may not be used to feeling, a complete absence of guilt. A quiet certainty that does not need to defend itself. A confidence that does not come from proving anything, but from finally standing in agreement with yourself and that restless sensation you have been noticing. That almost electric stirring under your skin that is not instability, that is not anxiety, that is the signal that something within you is waking up, something that has been waiting for permission to return. And now it is no longer asking, it is moving, it is stepping forward, and when it does, it brings a presence that cannot be ignored, a kind of magnetism that does not rely on effort. Because it is not constructed, it is not performed. It is the natural result of being undivided, and to understand why this matters, you need to recognize how most people move through the world, fragmented, split between desire and judgment, wanting one thing but criticizing themselves for it, feeling drawn to something but immediately questioning whether it is allowed, constantly adjusting, constantly negotiating with themselves, and that creates a kind of static, an energy that feels hesitant, uncertain, diluted. But when this trine activates, that division collapses. What you want and what you have been denying become one and the same. And suddenly, there is no hesitation, no apology, no need to shrink. You occupy your space fully. And that creates a frequency that others can feel instantly, even if they cannot explain it. It is the energy of someone who is not asking for permission, someone who knows who they are and what they stand for. And that is rare because most people are still trying to be accepted, still reshaping themselves to fit into expectations that were never designed for them. So when you show up in this state completely aligned, completely present, it creates a pull, a gravitational effect that draws attention without effort. And this is the essence of what you are stepping into. Not a performance of confidence, but the embodiment of it. The kind that does not need validation because it is rooted in truth. And that is why this moment is so powerful. Because it is not asking you to become someone new. It is asking you to stop abandoning who you already are. And as this energy continues to move through you, it begins to express itself in very real, very specific ways. Not just in how you feel internally, but in the choices you make, in the boundaries you set, in the words you finally allow yourself to say. And this is where the first shift begins to take shape. Because the initial desire that breaks free under this influence is not dramatic on the surface, but it is profound in its impact. It is the simple but powerful recognition that you have the right to refuse, the right to step back, the right to say no. And once that door opens, nothing in your life continues in the same way. What is about to surface next may feel even more confronting because it reaches into patterns that were not formed yesterday but were conditioned into you over years. And if you look closely at your recent behavior, you will recognize how often you have overridden your own truth just to maintain harmony. How many times you said yes while something inside you was quietly resisting. How often you prioritized being agreeable over being honest, and that pattern did not come from nowhere. It was taught, reinforced, rewarded, until choosing yourself began to feel like a violation of something deeper. And over the past 3 weeks, that pattern has likely intensified. You may have found yourself agreeing to things that drained you, staying silent in moments that asked for your voice, adjusting yourself to meet expectations that were never aligned with who you are. And each of those moments left a subtle imprint, a quiet tension between what you felt and what you expressed, and that tension has been building. Because every time you ignore your own boundary, you create a fracture within yourself, and that fracture cannot sustain itself indefinitely. And now, under this exact alignment between Mars in Aries and Black Moon Lilith, that fracture begins to close. Not by forcing confrontation, but by restoring alignment. Mars in Aries carries the essence of unapologetic identity, the force that declares existence without seeking validation, while Lilith embodies the part of you that would rather stand alone than compromise its truth. And when these two meet in harmony, something within you reorganizes. The habit of people pleasing starts to feel unnatural. The guilt that once accompanied boundaries loses its grip. The hesitation that once held you back dissolves into a steady, grounded clarity. And what replaces it is not aggression, but sovereignty. A quiet but unshakable knowing that you are allowed to choose yourself, and that knowing translates into action in ways that may surprise you. You may find yourself declining something you would have accepted before, stepping away from dynamics that no longer feel right, or finally expressing something you have been holding in for far too long. And when you do it, will not feel like a dramatic act. It will feel simple, almost inevitable, because for the first time your internal truth and your external behavior are moving in the same direction, and that is only the first layer. Because beneath the need for boundaries, there is a deeper desire that has also been waiting to emerge, a longing that is less about immediate interactions and more about the direction of your life itself, a pull towards something wider, something more meaningful, something that cannot be contained within the structures you have been following. And this is where the influence of Lilith in Sagittarius becomes unmistakable. Sagittarius is the archetype of the seeker, the one who questions, explores, and refuses to accept inherited narratives without experiencing truth firsthand. And when that energy has been suppressed, it does not disappear. It turns into restlessness, into a sense that something is missing, even when everything appears stable. And you may have felt that recently, a quiet dissatisfaction that you could not fully explain, a sense that the path you are on is not wrong but not complete. And yet every time that feeling surfaced, there was likely a counter-voice reminding you to be practical, to stay safe, to not disrupt what is already working, because society does not easily accept those who question its structures. It labels them irresponsible, it warns against uncertainty, it encourages comfort over expansion. And so you learn to contain that part of yourself, to think about change rather than act on it, to imagine different possibilities without stepping into them. But today that containment weakens, because when Mars in Aries forms this trine with Lilith in Sagittarius, the desire for truth moves from concept into action. It becomes something you feel in your body, something that urges you to move, to choose to step beyond what is familiar. And that can manifest in many ways. An urge to change direction, to leave something behind, to express an idea you have kept hidden, or to pursue an experience that calls to you even if it does not make logical sense. And what is remarkable is not just the impulse itself, but the absence of the fear that usually accompanies it. Because in this alignment, your internal compass strengthens to a point where external opinions lose their authority, and you begin to understand that choosing your path is not an act of rebellion, but an act of alignment. And once you allow yourself to move in that direction, something shifts permanently, because you realize that the life you are meant to live cannot be built on borrowed expectations. And from there, the energy moves even deeper into a space that is rarely spoken about. Directly, a desire that is often hidden beneath layers of conditioning and shame. The longing for connection that goes beyond surface interaction, beyond roles and appearances, into something raw and transformative. And this is where the third expression of this transit begins to unfold, not as something separate, but as a continuation of the same process. Because as you reclaim your boundaries and your truth, you also begin to recognize what kind of connection you are no longer willing to settle for, and what kind of intimacy your soul has been quietly asking for all along. There is a precise moment within this day that changes everything, and if you are not paying attention, you might miss how quickly the energy shifts from internal awakening into external reality. Because, at exactly 12:40 in the afternoon on April 28th, only hours after the Mars-Lilith alignment reaches its peak, Venus forms an exact trine with Pluto-Venus, moving through Gemini and Pluto positioned in Aquarius, both operating through the element of air, both governing the realms of connection, communication, and the deeper architecture of relationships. And when this second alignment layers itself over the first, something rare begins to take shape. The raw physical magnetism that Mars and Lilith ignited does not remain isolated. It fuses with the psychological depth and transformative intensity that Venus and Pluto bring. And what emerges from that fusion is not just attraction. It is an almost overwhelming pull, the kind that reaches beyond surface interaction and taps directly into the parts of you that you have rarely allowed anyone to see, because this is where your most hidden desires begin to surface, not as fleeting thoughts, but as undeniable truths. The fantasies you never voiced, the type of connection you convinced yourself was unrealistic, the level of intimacy that felt too intense to even admit to yourself. All of it rises into awareness, and it does so without shame, without the usual internal resistance, because Lilith governs desire that refuses to be judged. Mars fuels the instinct to act on it. Venus defines what you are drawn to and what you value. And Pluto opens the doorway into the depths of transformation and obsession. And when these four forces move in harmony rather than conflict, The barriers that once kept these parts of you separated begin to dissolve, not through confrontation, not through crisis, but through a seamless alignment that makes your deepest cravings feel natural, accessible, and real. And you may notice this expressing itself in very tangible ways. A conversation that suddenly goes deeper than expected, an admission that feels both vulnerable and liberating, a recognition that what you want is not something to hide, but something to honor. And in that recognition, something shifts in how you are perceived, because authenticity at this level carries a frequency that cannot be ignored. Those who continue to suppress themselves remain distant, muted, easily overlooked. But those who step into their truth fully, without apology, without dilution, become unforgettable. And today you are being moved into that space, whether you feel ready or not. And that is the part that many people resist, because there is a belief that transformation should happen gradually, that you should have time to prepare to adjust, to become comfortable with what is unfolding. But this kind of alignment does not operate on comfort. It operates on timing, and when the window opens, it does not wait for hesitation to resolve. It simply presents the opportunity and observes what you choose to do with it. And this specific configuration, the Mars-Lilith trine, combined with the Venus-Pluto trine, creates a portal, a temporary frequency where integration becomes effortless, where boldness feels instinctive, where the gap between desire and action disappears. But that window is not permanent. Mars moves quickly, Lilith moves more slowly, but the exact angle that allows this level of clarity is brief, and that means the choice in front of you is immediate. If you've been waiting for a signal to act, to speak, to claim something you've been holding back, this is that signal, and those who recognize it and move with it will experience changes that seem almost disproportionate to the action-taken, relationships shifting in a matter of moments, opportunities appearing without warning, a presence that alters how others respond to them entirely, while those who hesitate, who retreat into doubt, who prioritize safety over truth, may find themselves looking back, wondering why nothing shifted, why the same patterns remained intact. And the difference between those outcomes is not chance. It is not external circumstance. It is the willingness to trust the part of yourself that has been waiting for this exact opening. And as this day completes and you move into the following morning, the external world may appear unchanged. The same environment, the same routines, the same structures. But internally, something fundamental has recalibrated. You may notice it as a subtle shift at first, a steadiness in your confidence, a clearer sense of direction, an ease in setting boundaries, a natural magnetism that does not require effort. And as the days continue, those internal changes begin to reflect outward. Interactions feel different, opportunities align in ways that feel almost intentional. Patterns that once required effort to break simply fall away. And that is how you know the threshold has been crossed. Not through a single dramatic moment, but through a series of changes that confirm you are no longer operating from the same version of yourself that existed before this alignment took place. What you are stepping into now is not a temporary surge or a passing emotional high. It is a structural shift in how you relate to yourself. Because the moment you stop resisting the parts of you that were once hidden, something irreversible begins to take place. And you may not fully grasp it in the exact second it happens. But you will feel it in the way your decisions change, in the way your body no longer agrees to things it used to tolerate, in the way your voice carries a different weight when you speak. Because this is what occurs when the internal division dissolves, when the version of you that desires and the version of you that judges those desires finally merge into one unified presence. And under this Mars-Lilith alignment, that process accelerates it, reveals to you what becomes possible when you are no longer negotiating your own existence, when you stop filtering yourself through expectations that were never designed to understand you, when you release the need to be accepted by spaces that only recognize you when you are diminished, And that realization does not arrive gently. It arrives as a recognition that the old way of being cannot sustain itself any longer, that the roles you have been playing feel restrictive, that the mask you once wore begins to feel heavy, misaligned, almost suffocating. And this is where the transformation deepens, because once you experience yourself without that fragmentation, once you feel what it is like to move without apology to exist, without shrinking, to act without seeking approval, there is no returning to the version of you that lived in constant adjustment. That version becomes incompatible with your new awareness. And this is why the energy of today is so significant. It does not just activate desire. It recalibrates your relationship with power itself. It shows you that your power was never something external to be earned or granted. It was something internal that became accessible the moment you stopped abandoning it. And as this awareness settles in, you may notice a quiet but undeniable shift, a sense of steadiness that does not require validation, a clarity that does not depend on reassurance, a magnetism that does not come from effort but from alignment, and that magnetism is not something you create. It is something that emerges naturally when you are no longer divided. And this is why the invitation of this moment is not to resist what is rising within you, but to trust it, to allow it to embody it fully. Because the instincts that are surfacing now are not random impulses. They are signals from a part of you that has always known what is true, a part that has been waiting for the conditions to express itself without interference, and now those conditions are present. Now the alignment supports that expression, and your role is not to control it, but to recognize it, to honor it, to move with it. Because on the other side of that movement is a version of you that is no longer constrained by the need to fit into expectations, a version that does not compromise its truth for comfort, a version that carries a presence so grounded and so authentic that it naturally reshapes the way others respond to it. And that version is not something you have to become, it is something you are remembering, something you are returning to the part of you that would rather stand alone in its truth than be accepted in a diminished form, the part that understands that freedom is not given but chosen. And as you allow that version to step forward, you will begin to see the ripple effects unfold, not just internally, but in the external world, in the way connections shift, in the opportunities that align, in the patterns that fall away without effort. And that is how you will know that something fundamental has changed, not because of a single dramatic moment, but because of a consistent difference in how you move through your life. And as you continue beyond this point, carry this awareness with you. Notice what has shifted. Notice what no longer fits. Notice what now feels natural, that once felt difficult, and allow yourself to continue expanding into that space. Because this is not the end of a process. It is the beginning of a new way of being. And if this message resonated with you, if you recognize yourself in what has been unfolding, then stay connected to this energy. Continue exploring it and allow it to guide you forward. And if you want to keep receiving insights like this, consider subscribing and sharing your experience. Because what you are moving through is not isolated. It is part of a larger shift that many are beginning to feel, and your awareness of it is what allows you to move with it rather than against it. So take care of yourself as you integrate this and continue forward with the clarity you have just accessed.